Hi everyone, I'm John Cornelius.
And I'm Mark Eatonson.
And this is a thought cooperative presentation on the history of psychoanalysis.
For many, the story of psychoanalysis begins and ends with one person, Sigmund Freud. But there were numerous explorers of the mind before Freud and many more after him. Modern psychoanalytic thought extends far beyond Freud's psychoanalytic theory. It's a kaleidoscope of insights into the workings of the mind.
Many people do not realize that psychoanalytic thinking is contemporary, alive, and quite in keeping with the emerging science of today. We hope to place this study of the mind in a historical context filled with exploration and discovery.
We begin with the story of hysteria, an epidemic that was mysterious, confusing, and unlike other afflictions of its day. It often featured clusters of bizarre and disturbing symptoms that came and went without obvious cause or explanation. Unlike previous epidemics, hysteria seemed to have little regard for race, class, social, or economic status. It struck rich and poor alike.
Descriptions of hysteria date back to ancient Egypt. Explanations have ranged from a wandering uterus to devil worship and witchcraft. In men, similar symptoms were blamed on evil spirits, but also on practices such as studying science, practicing the arts, and involvement in the aristocracy. For example, King Louis XIV was said to have suffered from the vapors, a precursor diagnosis to hysteria. Early treatments were invasive and at times violent, including everything from manipulating the uterus, inserting devices into women's bodies, to burning at the stake.
A representative case of hysteria involved Mary Glover, a 14-year-old girl who lived in 1602. Mary's symptoms began the day after having an upsetting argument with her neighbor.
The next day, Mary felt fine until she saw the same neighbor. She then suddenly reported a choking sensation, and others attested that her throat seemed to swell. She was unable to speak and reported going blind. She experienced seizures and a paralysis that progressed from her hand to her entire left side. Whenever she sensed the neighbor nearby, her symptoms dramatically worsened.
These symptoms continued for weeks. Her body contorted into rigid positions impossible for others to maintain. At times, she moved as if in slow motion. At others, she thrashed frantically. During one fit of paralysis, the sheriff tested her symptoms by burning her skin. While Mary clearly had evidence of burns, she did not respond in the slightest.
In Mary's time, it was very hard to explain her symptoms as anything other than witchcraft. However, people are even more surprised that hysteria continues today. The most sensational of these are episodes of mass hysteria. For example, in North Carolina in 2004, 10 young women had episodes resembling seizures and fainting spells that had no organic etiology. In New York in 2012, 15 teenagers had unexplained outbreaks of spasms, tics, and seizures. There have been documented mass outbreaks of hysterical blindness, skin crawling, paralysis, and inability to speak. On an individual level, these symptoms are clustered together in what are called the somatoform and dissociative disorders.
Somatoform disorders are when physical symptoms are determined to have a psychological cause. Dissociative disorders involve psychological detachment from reality. These conditions are also more common than you might think. A recent study found that 20% of people admitted to a hospital complaining of physical illness actually met criteria for a somatoform disorder. A different study estimated that up to 18% of the general population met criteria for one of the dissociative disorders.
Clearly, hysteria by these other names is alive and well today. Ophthalmologists see hysterical blindness, neurologists encounter unexplained amnesia, and obstetricians witness pseudocyesis, which used to be called hysterical pregnancy. On the dissociative end of the spectrum, clinicians continue to encounter the phenomenon of multiple personalities, depersonalization, and dissociative fugue, where a person becomes disoriented and travels days at a time with no memory of who they are or where they have been.
And although we've come a long way since Mary's day, we know far less than you may think we do about the causes of mental illness. In the 18th and 19th centuries, the term hysteria was used to group together numerous unexplained phenomena, a kind of umbrella diagnosis. Yet despite increased categories and refined assessment techniques, the field of psychology continues to suffer from similar diagnostic dilemmas.
For example, in 2013, the National Institute of Mental Health withdrew its support from the DSM-5, the premier diagnostic manual of mental health, citing its lack of scientific validity. They posted a letter describing how psychiatrists continue to create diagnoses through general consensus without scientific validation, which is essentially the same way the diagnosis of hysteria was generated in centuries past.
However, one thing most scientists do agree on is that hysteria, somatoform, and dissociative disorders are psychological in nature. Believe it or not, such an idea was radical in Mary's time. In fact, the atypical thing about Mary's case was that one physician, Edward Jordan, testified that the cause of Mary's symptoms was in fact psychological.
However, despite Dr. Jordan's efforts, he was not believed. Mary ended up receiving an exorcism, and her neighbor was punished for witchcraft. Overall, people lived in fear, afraid of spirits, the dead, angels, and magic. This was a world of unexplained happenings, confusion, and disorientation.
And it's in this age where we find the first scientists of the mind. Early investigators like Dr. Jordan, who sought psychological explanations rather than supernatural ones.
It is the world in which psychoanalysis was born. This series continues with a look at other pioneers like Paracelsus, Jean Charcot, Pierre Janet, and Joseph Breuer.